The other day, a ball came at me in paddle, and I should have moved, and I couldn't move. And I was like, "Oh, that sucks."
Listen, it's raining all day, so I can't tell if it's like 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. midnight.
I don't even know where this week went,
You
man.
finally stationed in one place, Ruchir.
For a change, I'm not in a airport or a hotel. Hi, welcome everyone. This is the sixth episode of the India Dialogue. We're so grateful that you're willing to give us a listen. My name is Ruchir. In today's episode, we've called Rishi Suri back to our show. Rishi, you may remember, is the former media advisor to Mehbooba Mufti and the editor of India's oldest Urdu newspaper, the Daily Mirror. The ever wonderful Mitali Mukherjee, who besides being a director of journalism at the Reuters Institute, she's well known for her work at CNBC. Manu Sundaram, or Manu, is not only a successful advocate with his own law practice, but is also a spokesperson for DMK. And I am the CEO at Distributed Energy and chair at the School of Policy and Governance. We're doing this because we care about India and want to discuss issues in a way that adds value. We're all friends, and we want to cover things going on, sensitive or not, friendly disagreements or not, without having to shout at each other or live in slogans. For now, this is an experiment that we want to run in the build-up of the 2024 national elections. Maybe we continue after, maybe we stop, but we want to give this a shot and help unpack important issues for India. Great. Two issues on the docket today. Mitali will lead us off through the first one. Mitali.
Ruchir, thank you for that. We're going to kick off with some foreign policy and know your neighbor in this segment. And we're talking about Maldives. I'm sure for people who are listening, you're probably quite interested in politics generally. So you did follow what happened in Maldives, which looked like quite a public spat that happened between both the countries and seems to point towards growing tension between India and Maldives. Why we're discussing it because there's been an important development, which is that an Indian civilian team will now go to Maldives or has reached Maldives already to replace the military personnel that was stationed there. There's about 3 aviation platforms where military personnel have been in the Maldives, and this time round, it looks like they will be moving out of there. Traditionally, they've offered humanitarian and medical services. This is important, because it is the first admission by the Ministry of External Affairs in India that this is actually happening and Indian military troops are moving out. And secondly, it seems to be from the point of view of Maldives, honoring a point that they had made, which is that they wanted to see Indian troops exit their country by the 10th of March. So let me start by sort of getting opinions in from everyone. And Ruchir, I know we generally sort of ask you to wait and you do it very patiently. So I think I'm going to start with you and then go to Manu and Rishi.
I think on this, the India Maldives things, we've obviously discussed it in an episode prior. I think the one thing I want to point out is as much as this is an interruption to India's policy around getting close to our neighbors as much as possible, especially in its drive or strive to counter China, I think the thing that's important in Maldives, especially, is that the country is not united in the anti-India stance. I think it became clear, especially some of the news that came around the parliament session and some of the fights that followed, that multiple opposition parties within Maldives are suspicious of the current government stance to be pro-China. A lot of them believe that India, as an old ally who has been there for Maldives for a very long time, should continue to be the favored partner of Maldives. So I do see, having seen some of that, I do think that this relationship is at the lowest point in its cycle, and I suspect that it will come back to its old glory days, but it'll take some time, given the current government in power there.
Manu, do you want to come in on that? Because as Richard pointed out, I mean, India is or was the only foreign power with a military presence in the Maldives. And I take his point about the fact that opinion might be split, but this was a pretty clear political blank for, for Muizu, and something he expressly said. It was a very clear sort of anti-India stand, and something there seemed to be clicking.
Let me touch upon this from three directions. Firstly, diplomacy, secondly, our neighborhood, and thirdly, the China piece. Diplomacy, they say, is saying the nastiest thing in such a nice way that you don't realize someone's been mean to you, right? But the nastiest things seem to have been said in the nastiest way. So my first sort of question to myself and everybody here is: have diplomatic channels broken down so badly between India and Maldives? We've had a long historical relationship, going back to the Rajiv Gandhi era in Maldives. Our cultural ties are very strong. It is not an accident that we have presence in Maldives. There is a lot of strategic requirements that Maldives fulfills for the Indian neighborhood. So it is a bit surprising that the diplomatic sort of channels, back channels, maybe seem to have not aligned or seem to have broken down under some pressure, and all of this has come out in the open. I don't think it is anyone's. It was surprising at all that they would step up the what they call the India Out campaign, which seemed to be a crucial part of Muizu's election campaign. But let's not forget that earlier regimes prior to Muizu's regime have been pro-India and less, pro-China. So therefore, I think it's a question of what diplomacy can and cannot do. The limits of diplomacy. I think our foreign minister, the external affairs minister, was quite candid when he says that we could not actually make all our friends happy, or we could not make even all our neighbors our friends. So, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea is that I think there is a tacit admission here that yes, we've not been able to ensure harmonious relationships going forward with Maldives, and things have now come so far out in the open that I can only put this down to a failure in our own diplomatic channels. Because I think there are many other countries who are not particularly pro-India at this moment. Some other countries, but it doesn't come down to this sort of public demand posturing, and asking for Indian troops to be replaced, or an outward sort of demand of the Indian military presence to be reduced to this extent, considering the historical ties. Secondly, quickly around the Indian neighborhood itself. So, out of the countries that we have, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, uh, Bhutan, and of course Nepal and Sri Lanka. Now, how many of these countries are completely on India's side? This again, Sri Lanka, like Maldives, in many ways, goes from India, China, but again, probably more clearly in the pro-China camp at the moment. I read somewhere, I don't know enough, and I'd love to hear from the others here, that Bangladesh sort of seems to be taking a leaf from the Maldives book and starting its own sort of India Out campaign. I know some of our ties with Pakistan, Afghanistan have not been very promising in the recent past. So the larger question of the Indian neighborhood itself, how many friends we do have and how many of them can we count on, is a huge question mark. Considering in 2014, when Mr. Modi was sworn into power, the number of leaders from the Indian neighborhood who turned up for the swearing in ceremony really showed the kind of promise that there was. And also, not to sort of forget for a moment that the two BJP governments, 2014 and 2019, under Mr. Modi, have made foreign policy a key political issue, perhaps like no other Indian government before. I mean, I can't go back all the way to Mrs. Gandhi's governments, but at least I think in the recent past, we've not had such a great deal of conversation around foreign policy debated domestically within Indian political discourse. And the third part, of course, is the China issue, right? I mean, clearly, in India, in the last 4, 5, maybe even 7, 8 years, has been a tremendous beneficiary of a lot of the countries, taking anti China stance. I mean, the rise of the Quad, in essence, is a counterbalance to China's rising sort of global geopolitical powers and so on. And India has played a vital role in some of these forums. So again, it's interesting how India will play this out, considering this is clearly a China sort of a move, and how this will sort of affect what India has in store geopolitically, what India thinks of the Indo-Pacific region, our own rules-based order, our own sort of counter offensive to the Chinese string of pearls or One Belt One Road initiatives. I think these are yet, according to me, to be clearly articulated. There is a lot of I think gung ho or bravado that Indian foreign policy discourse has gone through in the last few years. Maybe there is some level of truth to it, but then a lot of it, I feel, will be seen in action and not just talk. We do have a very, very articulate external affairs minister, but I think now is the time to also see the action in Indian foreign policy evolving and growing into something. And when people ask, what is the Indian foreign policy now, of course we moved away from the non-aligned movement. We've become a more truer geopolitical force in the neighborhood. But what is the policy that India has thought through? How have we sort of envisaged this policy to play out over the next 50 years, and what will be India's role globally is, according to me, still a little unclear. And we've just come off, I think, another sort of very high profile Raisina dialogue, which has been India's landmark foreign policy think tank event over the last maybe 10, 12 years. But still there's a lot of, I would say, lack of clarity about where India is headed in terms of its own foreign policy stand, and how it has postured itself or positioned itself over the next 50 years. I'm not clear, and it is something that I'm hoping to understand from the rest of this conversation.
Rishi, do you want to come in on that? And it would be great also for some perspective on, what looks like two binary items and almost very differently sized in terms of their impact. I mean, here we are talking about, for the first time in many, many decades, the fact that Indian troops are moving out of Maldives, which is geopolitically, a really critical space for us to be in. And the precursor to that seemed to be a really ugly, an almost sort of pointless Twitter spat. Are there connections between the two, or is this one completely different issue and the other one a reflection of bitter relations?
So let me just start by saying that, unfortunately, this is the Maldives recent case is just one case. The next few decades will be India versus China. And unfortunately, the smaller countries, especially around India, will be stuck in the middle of that spat. Now, the genesis, as Manu also mentioned, of what has happened with the troops moving out was the India Out campaign that was started a few years ago. It was started by this publication called Dhiares, which is run by a guy called Ahmad Azan. And Abdullah Yamin, the former president, was supporting that at the time. Now, Ahmad Azan was one of the first pro-China voices in Maldives. He always advocated for a very heavy Chinese presence in India, in Maldives, and wanted India to leave. I don't think anybody has any doubts that he's funded by China to do that disinformation campaign. In fact, the last elections in which Mohammad Muizzu won, the EU election observation team actually was in Maldives, and they have officially said in that report that Dhiares and Ahmad Azan have run this disinformation campaign, which is as a plank to get Muizzu elected. So it's not even just India saying it. I mean, the European Union has officially said that that was the case. Now, I'm one of the few people who actually have had a public spat with Ahmad Azan on Twitter over 3 months, where yeah, he attacked me and I attacked him, and it ended by me quoting some of his old tweets and actually calling him out on how he is funded by China, and asking for for him to reveal DRS's funding mechanism, etc. And that's the way it ended. But you know what is really worrying in all of this for India is that Maldives is very, very important for India. It comes within the exclusive economic zone. A number of key maritime routes go through there, especially for trade. Uh, and the unfortunate part is that even when India was friends with Maldives and before Mizu came into power, Maldives already owed China $1.5 billion. The GDP of Maldives is $4.9 billion. So, I mean, it is ridiculous. They're already in a debt trap with China, which is now going to get many, many, many times worse with Mizu and the way things are going. So this is, of course, the negative side of it. But let me just say that India has not given up. Our diplomatic channels are very, very much open. We're trying to resolve the situation as best we can. Obviously, I'm not speaking for the government, but at least of what I know and what I hear, I can tell you that efforts are on to resolve the situation and have some sort of a communication line always open. And again, as I said, it's going to be India versus China for the next few decades. So I'm not too. This is not a lost cause. Maldives will come back to the Indian fold sometime very, very soon. So I think it's fine.
Rishi, but I mean, just to sort of scratch that a little bit more, India and China being the largest two existing nations in this subcontinent is not a new development, and many small countries, including countries like Nepal, etc., have generally treaded a pretty careful line in terms of keeping both sides quite happy. And as you say, this is what sort of belies logic. India is Maldives' biggest trade partner. It's a top export destination. We've been traditional donors. We are the only country that had a presence over there. So for Maldives, we were the only foreign power with a military presence. um, and and honestly speaking, and we can one can debate that separately, which is that to plant everything on a disinformation campaign is honestly not doing justice to the fact that there is a political process underway and someone has been chosen. So logically, sort of what's going on in the minds of the Maldives government to have, considering all this, trade partner, exports, donor, to have taken such a hard line. And before visiting China, Mizu actually went ahead and said Maldives' small size is not a license for anyone to bully it. So are we sort of being a little trite about the fact that this is just India China, or should we be a bit more realistic about the fact that some of our smaller neighbors are feeling disenfranchised, are feeling disengaged, are not feeling included, or are feeling, in his own words, bullied?
I don't think so. I mean, if you look at the India-Maldives relationship just before Mizu came into power, India cannot be doing more for Maldives. I mean, it's just not possible. We were doing everything possible that a partner can do in every way. I mean, literally, I mean, if you look at COVID, Maldives, if we have saved millions of lives in Maldives, I don't see how India can do any more to help a bilateral partner. So I don't really see that to be an issue. Obviously, domestic politics is definitely an issue. Perhaps the incumbent could not capture the imagination as well as they could. India will use as an excuse. Of course, the plank is always there. In Maldives, the India-China plank will always be very, very important in local politics as well. But the larger picture, again, as I said, is going to be India-China. And the issue now is India has become very aggressive when it comes to their foreign policy, especially when it comes to China. India is no longer apprehensive to say certain things that people would not have said maybe a couple of decades ago. And India is rising very fast. And unfortunately for China, they are now on the down low. The economy is slowing down. The real estate sector is virtually on the verge of a collapse. So this kind of thing is going to get worse with China's slowdown and India's rise. China will get desperate. Such things will happen. Uh, I mean, I don't want to quote sources here, but literally, and this will come out in the news very soon. Like, India actually has information on how much money has exchanged hands between some Maldives leaders in the current government and the Chinese government. So it's just, I mean, it's too obvious for you to ignore the kind of money China has spent to make this happen in Maldives. But again, as I said, the ball is now in India's court. We have to make sure diplomatically, in every way possible, that Maldives comes back to the Indian fold. So it'll be interesting to see. And you know what Manu said is absolutely right. The China is trying something similar in Bangladesh as well. There has been the seed of the India Out campaign, which has been sown there. It's very, very small there, and the local government is not going to really allow it to grow in any way. So I think that will get stopped out pretty soon. But the efforts will carry on to do this all
Yeah.
around India's neighborhood.
I mean, a country like Maldives could well turn around and say, well, India itself is saying we may have differences with China, but we're very open to investment with them. So if they want to bring money in, that's fine. Which is not untrue. But Ruchir and Manu, I'd love to hear more from you. Ruchir, particularly as someone who's kind of looking at it from the outside, do you sense a changing dynamic in the subcontinent?
Yeah, I mean, ever since the hand skirmish between India and China, I feel like that was sort of such a clear line in the sand in the changes in India's policy, just foreign policy, full stop. Because now it went from trying to be extremely neutral in all circumstances to zooming in, so focused on making sure that India presents itself as a counter to China in all of its alliances, all of its neighbor dealings, and so on. So I think, and Guru said this a few episodes ago. It's sort of this assertive, and Rishi just mentioned it too. It's this assertive India stance on making sure that wherever India's interests are important, they are taken as a counter to China to ensure that those interests don't get negatively affected. I think we will keep seeing this unless there is significant advances between India and China in terms of talking about not testing each other, which is where things are right now.
Manu, I may be taking a bit of a left turn here as well, but do you think, as an onlooker or as an onlooking neighboring country, issues like these reports of CAA now coming back, and the fact that the expectation is the government wants to get CAA out the door before elections, even, which frankly looks like a tall task. So I'm not sure how that happens. But do you think sort of narratives such as those poison an already brittle situation?
Well, I think they can definitely contribute to the narrative, the India story. And all of this, according to me, will come down to how India is positioning uh, the nation over the next 25 years. If you're positioning the nation around concepts of cultural religious nationalism, and that is according to me the key sort of limbs or ingredients of the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 and a bunch of other sort of pro religion reforms in the country, then I think it certainly contributes to neighbors, especially countries where religious, minorities in India are in majority. I think it contributes for them to take a different perspective on India, and it is something that I think in the past we have avoided, and it is something I think in the last 9-10 years the government has not been able to steer clear of. I think these are contributing factors. To what extent, I do not know, right? But then one thing is clear: we are surrounded by countries which are dominated by other religions. This is sort of the practical reality of the Indian subcontinent, and if it is something that we need to sort of keep in mind and tackle as we go ahead. Now, like I said, it comes back, according to me, to breakdown of diplomatic channels in one sense, which again, I'm reiterating only to show that these kinds of sort of diplomatic skirmishes are not at all new. They've been consistent over the last 50, 60 years. But what is new is this sort of becoming or generating into a social media, a spat, where clearly these have escalated. You knew that there is a India Out campaign. You knew that there is a present leadership or regime in Maldives which is anti-India or pro-China. And so how it should have been played is something that I'm still or why did it play out like this is something that I don't particularly understand. I know we have extremely well-oiled diplomatic machinery, so it comes as a bit of a shock to me that we haven't been able to smoothly swim past this particular set of choppy waters, right? In fact, we've played straight into China's hands in some ways, by sort of having this very public social media spat with the Maldives regime, and then, between the two countries. So I think definitely our own neighborhood, I think we are maybe losing more friends. I wouldn't say we are making adversaries or enemies yet, but we're definitely losing our old friends, our friends who have been sort of by our side over the last 40, 50 years. And I think that is something, maybe even if not openly, I think in the Indian diplomatic community is aware of, and I think they are taking steps, or I at least hope that they are taking steps to rectify this particular issue. So that's my sort of roundabout thought on a topic that I'm not very familiar with. But like I said, I started this conversation so I could understand a little bit more. And thanks, Rishi. I think what you've said really sort of joins a lot of the dots for me in my mind.
No, I agree. It's a tricky one. And I think just to me as well, personally, just looking on, what I find a bit odd is belated confirmations. The fact that the Maldives government made that announcement, and then you heard much later from an MEA spokesperson a confirmation of that. It sits a bit odd as someone who's sort of watching or is an avid consumer of news and political affairs. But time will tell, as they say. Shall we move on to our next topic?
Yes, so moving on, India's space program. Now, India is gearing up for its first astronaut mission called Gaganyaan, where we're sending 3 Indian astronauts up on a spacecraft. Prime Minister Modi recently revealed the squad of 4 astronauts selected for the mission. They are currently undergoing mission-specific training at Bengaluru at the astronaut training facility, and we have an unmanned mission later this year, and then hopefully the manned mission next year. Now, the Gaganyaan project aims to demonstrate India's human spaceflight capabilities by launching the crew in an orbit of 400 kilometers on a 3-day mission, and of course, safely bringing them back to Earth, landing eventually in Indian sea waters. Now, to me, what is very interesting is that India's space program is, always was and still is a reflection of India's global ambitions. And it really tells you a story of where India is going. We've had one of the oldest space programs. Unfortunately, we didn't make the kind of progress we should have. I think one of the most interesting parts to me was the conspiracy theories around Dr. Vikram Sarabhai's death. And I think they still mystify most of us who follow the India space program. But recent successful missions are really telling a story. The Prime Minister has set a target of having India's first space station in place by 2035. So I think that's very, very ambitious indeed. Now, I'd love to hear from all of you about, and again, let's start with Ruchir this time, since Ruchir is usually the last, as Mitali said. Ruchir,
Not personal, Ruchir, not personal.
As an observer, Ruchir, how do you see India's rise and India's space program going next to each other, especially when in the context of how SpaceX and Elon Musk has literally revolutionized space travel and space exploration around the world. And of course, they're looking to commercialize it. But in that context.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of any progress in space and science. Just generally, I feel like as a country, ISRO is such a shining example of what's possible if we put our mind to something. And as part of thinking about this, I was doing some research of everything we've got out of ISRO, including flame-proof coatings for fire safety and thermal wear for soldiers, artificial heat pumps, denture materials. I mean, not to mention everything around satellites and communications and so on. So we are strong beneficiaries of ISRO's progress, and ISRO runs at. I mean, this is the most amazing thing, right? It runs at tiny budgets relative to the West in terms of what we achieve. So it's a shining example of what's possible when we try to do something and put our mind to it. So I'm really excited about the Gaganyaan program. I think putting astronauts in space is such a great leap forward for science in India and our ability to bring people in space. I this would maybe normally be reserved for Aapne Sunaa Kya at the end, but the Nambi Narayan movie, the rocketry, I think it was, where there was this plot, and I don't know how accurate some of the parts in the movie are, but there was obviously this plot described in the movie around the West trying to sabotage India's efforts to buy Russian technology to make it more prominent in the small satellite space market. I believe that governments do, and this came through the India-Maldives topic too, governments do make these attempts to have a go at advances of other countries. So I hope that we give this our best and we're successful, because I can't imagine what it'll mean for our country and especially all of the science advances that come out of it.
Talking of budgets and ISRO, the joke was rather, well, it wasn't a joke, it was actually true. The movie Gravity, George Clooney and Sandra Bullock's movie, cost more than India's lunar mission. So that's the kind of difference we're talking about. Manu, it's interesting. You obviously follow this as well, and for the longest time, India's space mission was more for communication, socio-economic purposes, and things like that. It's sometime, I would say, in the 90s, perhaps the military application came into focus, and I think government started thinking about it. 2019, I think, was, if I'm not mistaken, was the turning point when India conducted the first anti-satellite tests, where they actually showcased that now they can shoot down objects, rather satellites in space. And that was really the public announcement for the world that India is now using space for military research, etc. as well. So again, similar question. India's rising along with this kind of a space program. Your thoughts?
See, two points, but before we get into that, though Ruchir always starts the show by saying, I'm a lawyer and I'm a spokesperson, I want to clarify something, that I actually studied astronomy and physics for the first 6 years in university in 2 degrees. I didn't do the course again and again, just to be clear. But so, I'm someone who believes that the study of space should be for science sake itself, right? I mean, whether you get other applications, which Ruchir is listed, and you also explained, Rishi. I think the study of space is something, I think, fundamental to our own understanding of life. Pre-evolution, the formation of planets, the formation of an atmosphere which allows oxygen and life forming elements, that constituted various sort of life forms that allowed us to evolve. So I'm very, very interested in the cosmology aspect also. But India rising is an interesting way to put this, Rishi, because ISRO, and its predecessor, I think it was called the INCOSPAR, National Committee for Space Research. They were set up by the first or the second Nehru government, so the
Yes.
late 50s, early 60s, and then from there ISRO evolved, and of course we've had this long history of a rich and a rich space sort of exploration tradition. As on date, my understanding is, because you went into numbers, Rishi, the annual budget is around 13,000 crores for space research, right? Again, like I said, I think it is an integral part of our own scientific endeavors. I think we are a rising space research power, and I think people acknowledge that. Of course, we had Mangalyaan and everything before that. So people do. I think the global science community does and has always acknowledged Indian contribution in this space. Okay, now couple of points that I always sort of want to come back to in this regard is, firstly, the most famous or well-known or two space scientists or space related scientists for us are Rakesh Sharma and Abdul Kalam, right? Of course, for different reasons, but that's sort of and they were seen as heroes, they were seen as pioneers. And of course, Abdul Kalam later on became president and also really took science and space related education very, very far, like almost he then, I think, opened up to a generation of young boys and girls, that they could study space, they could study science, and they could really rise to the top of the Indian political establishment, nominal as it might be. And I've always wondered why we don't have and why we don't celebrate more Indian space scientists. It's something that I feel is a little bit undercooked when it comes to Indian space research. Of course, various political leaders have taken greater credit than they should for the achievements of the science community, but nevertheless, I think that is something I hope in the days to go, we will sort of celebrate them more. I would love to hear what the space scientists, actually the astronauts for Gaganyaan, actually wanted to say. Right, when I looked up after I saw the news, a lot of the news was around either the Prime Minister felicitating them, or apparently one of them is married to a Malayali actor. There's nothing actually to tell a young person. I mean, I'm not a young person, but many young persons trying to understand what an Indian astronaut had to go through. They went to Russia for, I believe, 12 or 14 months to underwent rigorous training, and they underwent rigorous and intensive scrutiny, physical, psychological, etc. Right, but there's not enough information for young people who want to understand what should I do to become an astronaut, like the four who have now been chosen for the mission. I think that's a huge failure, and I'll come down to the second real sort of opportunity/failure as well, which is that we've not leveraged ISRO's successes into space education. Right, like I said, I studied astronomy and physics for 6 years. When I finished my schooling, I wanted to study astronomy. I couldn't find a world-class Indian institute teaching that. Right, there's a few. There's one in Pune, there's one in Bangalore. Maybe there's a couple more now. I haven't kept track. But there aren't top class institutions like we do have for engineering or medicine or even business and many other similar fields. So I think that's a real sort of missed opportunity for us. I think successive generations, successive governments, we've not done enough to leverage our own inherent strengths, and ISRO's like very, very positive, admirable outcomes into space education. And I did look up the national education policy to see if they have something, and I couldn't find very much in it. So what are we doing? Why are we not sort of using these advancements in space science and research to actually take this to a wider, greater audience. I mean, every year we have a couple of, I think flagship events. It's called the Indian Space Congress, and the other is the Indian Science Congress. But this just, in the Indian Science Congress, space does not play a big enough role, right? And I think it should, like very many of the other sort of areas of research and technology. So these are my pet peeves. Like, I've been waiting since 2007 when I finished my MPhil in astronomy to talk about this. I'm really glad we set up this podcast to do that today.
So, Manu, let me give you some good news. I'm actually working with a Bombay-based company, and we're trying to get develop content in collaboration with ISRO for school children, where we actually talk exactly what you're saying about heroes, about missions, about what they did, how they did. We're developing comics as well. So, hopefully, in the next 1 or 2 years, there should be a fair bit of that kind of education as well. But thank you for that. Mitali, last but not the least.
Yeah. First I'm curious to know whether Manu sort of quoted his wife by showing her the constellations and saying, you are as beautiful as Sirius up in the sky. But
She was the
maybe that's
brightest star for him.
Toastmaster and I. And I actually want to start with a little bit of humor, Rishi, which is that I was amused to see on Twitter, especially, a lot of influential people, including someone who I admire, a business personality like Anand Mahindra, actually tweet saying, "Never in our lifetime did we see Indian astronauts, and it's such a huge moment to see that." Now, I grew up in far more sort of modest surroundings than Mr. Mahindra did. So we had one shared television for a large community. But I remember quite clearly seeing Rakesh Sharma, who was India's first astronaut and did go to the moon and did make all of us very proud. So I find this sort of negating of history from 2014 backwards quite amusing. Manu is right. The four astronauts were trained at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center, and you would be interested to know, Manu, that Rakesh Sharma also trained there in 1984. So there's a rich history over there. I have 2 points to make. One is around the money. It's not so much about the budget, but what I found interesting was that there's talk of 100% FDI in the space now. There's talk of a lot more sort of benefits for startups that are doing work around space imagery, space tech. So at this point, India has, I think, about just under 200 tech startups. There's launch vehicles, there's imagery involved in that, and the hope is, and these numbers always bemuse me. The hope is that the country's space economy will reach 44 billion by 2033, and it's currently at less than $9 billion. So I sometimes wonder where we get this extrapolation from. What is it that these private companies are doing that we are going from a 9 billion figure to 44 billion in 2033? And sort of crucially, what are we doing to support them now? I am also keen and interested to know, when you open up with 100% FDI, who is it that you're opening the doors to? At this point, as all of you have so rightly pointed out, I think what is phenomenal about ISRO is the fact that this is, it's a public resource almost, right? And it's working on a shoestring budget, but it's doing phenomenal things. When you open up with 100% FDI, which are the companies currently involved in or deeply engaged in space tech? And are we opening the doors to that kind of partnership? Because I can think of someone who currently runs X, formerly Twitter. I'm not sure, what it is or who it is that we are trying to court in terms of private equity or private interest in this. The second point I want to make is sort of, as I said earlier, this stop-start nature of how we count history backwards. I mean, ISRO was established in 1969. My research tells me that Aryabhat, our most famous satellite, was launched in 1975. Since ISRO was established, there's been 124 spacecraft missions, 17 satellites with different permutations and combinations. And, I actually want to point to someone like Ruchir over here, who is he sort of really underplays his introduction and says that he's an entrepreneur. But I see Ruchir as an institution builder. And anyone who is an institution builder can tell you the amount of time and effort it takes for something to grow into what it does as a strong sort of being on its own. um, you don't sort of you don't rustle up this space tech overnight. You don't do it in a year, and you don't do it in 2 years. It is such a long process of putting time and effort and commitment and dedication, to have started something like in this day and age. It's perfectly fine to be talking about this. To have started something like ISRO in the 1960s, when we were clearly an economy that had many other problems, very, very rural, very agrarian, not part of the developed set. To do that, it displays a lot of courage, and it also displays the fact that you're committed to this. You want to see this grow into something a long time after you are around to even see the benefits or fruits of it. So I think we should just pause, while we celebrate some of these achievements, and they're such rich achievements and such proud ones, to also give credit to the fact that institution building is not about one person or one party or one outlet. And I'm not even pointing fingers here. I'm saying this is a long process. It takes a lot. So to start sort of the stop start nature of credit giving, saying, okay, from 2014 onwards we did fantastic in space, and then I don't know, if the government changes, then it will become, oh, from 2024 onwards we've done fantastic work in space. Like, come on, guys, let's be more adult about this whole conversation. I think that's my sort of pet peeve around this. But as a moment of pride, it's fantastic, Rishi. It's almost like, it's like Wall Street and that little girl facing the bull. I feel like it's that, ISRO's just standing there saying, okay, China, Russia, US, give it to me. I got it.
No, but you're absolutely right, Mitali. But I think the unfortunate nature about politics is that the government of the day tends to take credit for whatever was happening, no matter how long before it
Yeah.
started. So, but I think that's a perfect segue to move on.
I want to make one public service announcement, which is that
Wait. Institution
ISRO
builder is
has this
speaking. Hang on.
open data platform called Bhuvan, and there people can plug in and open, look for various information around like agriculture, water, forestry. They basically make this data available to any entrepreneur who wants to build a startup. It's quite incredible. I would check that out. They are very proud of it, but unfortunately, it's not gotten as much attention as it deserves. So check out Bhuvan. It's there. It's ISRO's geodata platform where you can get a lot of data about the mapping and imaging that ISRO has done.
Nice. But did you actually just put your have you heard into very nice segue if you did. But just to sort of, before we jump on to have you heard, just to be very open, I don't want any question left unanswered. So Mitali, if you want to know how I did impress my partner, my wife, is I took her to Interstellar, the movie director.
That was
I was able to explain every single scene, and very impressed with that. My astrophysics graduate degree came in handy. Let's move to Have You Heard, which is a small segment we do at the end, but it is something which we all have a great joy in bringing to our viewers. It will be a small tidbit or an interesting piece of information, or a song, or a piece of art which has really captured our attention or admiration over the last week. So let's start again with Ruchir, as we have for this show.
I've done all my first time for like the next few episodes now. I have a tech one again, which is around OpenAI. If you've heard of, I hope you've heard of OpenAI, which is the inventor of ChatGPT, where people have been amazed by the fact that you can ask it any question and it'll answer it like a human being. One of the original funders of OpenAI was Elon Musk, whom we brought up in the show earlier. At the beginning, OpenAI was a not-for-profit. And as a not-for-profit, what they were trying to do was get ahead of this idea of artificial general intelligence. So this all-knowing AI, which could, independent of context, understand a question and answer it. It was not just that it followed probability of words the way it does right now. And so when it was set up, OpenAI was supposed to be open artificial intelligence. Everybody would know and see what AI is. Over a period of time, Sam Altman and Elon Musk did not agree on its vision, and OpenAI, in a really convoluted structure, created a for-profit which is owned 49% by Microsoft. It's complicated. It's not clear the consequence of converting a not-for-profit into a for-profit. Anyway, long story short, as of this morning, Elon Musk has now sued OpenAI for veering away from its mission of uh, building artificial general intelligence to advance humanity, and instead selling its interest out to somebody like Microsoft. So it's interesting to see how that plays out, where someone took a position of doing something for the benefit of humanity and later changed it to a for-profit. The person who could meaningfully take OpenAI on, because OpenAI now is quite a wealthy company, Elon Musk is taking them on for going back, like to get them back on their pathway. So that's an interesting story.
Really interesting. And of course, whenever there's a lawsuit, one particular part of our society gets very excited. So I'm being a lawyer. And then we'll go to Mitali.
So, I think for me, what was interesting this past week was perhaps how wildlife preservation and animal welfare has suddenly uh, now been done by the richest in India. Ratan Tata announced the opening of this very, very fancy animal hospital after his own dog could not get the help, unfortunately, that he needed, and he didn't make it. And now he's setting up one up in Bombay. And then, of course, the what's been all over the news now is Anant Ambani, the younger Ambani who's getting married. He set up this thing called Vantara, which is now the country's largest wildlife preservation project. It's spread over 3,000 acres and has animals from literally all species there, which they're helping. So it's impressive that finally something like this is now been done in a private way. I mean, the government was anyway doing since, I don't know, decades now. But it's interesting to see the corporates getting into the action. I'm sure they're writing up a whole bunch of CSR under this, but still, as long as it gets done, I'm happy.
Fantastic. Mitali?
Yeah, Manu, and I was going to tell Rishi, it's all good as long as they don't name, any of those animals Sita, because then we have a problem. Although, if anyone's interested in naming a tigress or a lioness Mitali, I just want to say I have no problem. It's all good. I actually have a little bit of a stat, and I think that's useful for Ruchir and Manu, who have little girls, and Rishi, who has a not so little girl but must also love this music, which is that because we're in the podcast genre, I came across a really interesting piece of research a few weeks back, actually, where they totted up the numbers for audio streaming in the US for last year. And by December, they had found that Taylor Swift, the singer, her music is streamed more in the US than an entire genre. So she was streamed more times than the entire jazz genre. She was streamed more than the entire classical genre. I think if she, was a label in her own, she would probably be right up there in the ratings. I think it's so phenomenal in our life and times to be seeing a performer who has not just the ability to sing, but transcends, my generation, which, as Manu said, is clearly not young, but also my 11-year-old daughter. Like she's reaching, and I'm sure, Manu, she'll reach, your 7-year-old daughter, and then she'll reach the next 5-year-old as well. So it's fantastic, and if y'all are not listening to it, you must listen to it, because you will start getting quizzed about it very soon. So this is generally a Taylor Swift appreciation sort of. Have you heard? Like, who is this person?
Mitali, I was in a business workshop this last weekend, and the guy is very famous. He asked, "What is Taylor Swift's job to be done. We were defining businesses and what their job to be done, and he described it as giving mother and daughter bonding time. So that was very insightful for me, because until that point I hadn't thought of Taylor Swift's music as mother daughter bonding time. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But she's
Very
influencing
interesting.
foreign policy. I don't know if you realize the Super Bowl finals. She was in Tokyo and she was to fly back because her boyfriend was playing in the team. And literally, the embassy issued a statement saying she will make it back in time. So that is unheard of.
And they used all her song titles in it, Rishi. Did you see that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
My
yeah. It's
God.
Yeah.
I
amazing.
mean, amazing.
They're truly living in the era of Tay, as they say. I remember, 20 years ago in Australia, there was an article which pretty much said, the Australian cricket captain is the most influential person in the country. And I think a similar comparison to Taylor Swift and the United States is not totally off the mark in some sense, right?
Yeah.
I always wonder when we do the Have You Heards, whether we will repeat any of the topics. So far, we've missed because we don't share topics with each other before
Yeah.
we do it. I think it adds a nice element of surprise to the person who's going forth, because I'm wondering whether anybody else has picked up on this. Mine is on someone who's been described as the conscience keeper and as an eminent jurist, a lawyer, Fali Nariman, who passed away on the 21st of February, so about a little more than a week ago. Interesting man, and of course, absolutely top-notch legal mind. He argued in almost every important case in the Supreme Court. So there's something called the judges case, which came up with the idea of collegium. There's the Nabam Rabia case, which talks a lot about the rights and the powers of the governor or the lack thereof, and the interstate disputes between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu in the Kaveri case. Now, what is the interesting have you heard about Fali Nariman that I want to share is that this is news to me. In 2012, so when Mr. Nariman would have been almost close to 80 years, he was briefed to represent the case for the respondents in a famous case called Suresh Kumar Kaushal, which actually ended up overturning NAS Foundation. So Suresh Kumar Kaushal had argued before the Supreme Court that same-sex couples and sexual acts between consenting adults within same-sex relationships is a criminal offense. And I was very surprised to hear that Fali Nariman, at the ripe old age of 80, had argued and urged the Supreme Court that the law had to move on with the time, and sexual acts between consenting adults cannot ever be a criminal offense. But what's the real sort of interesting bit about Fali Nariman was he's also represented the Union Carbide group, where after the huge sort of, environmental issue, and when they had to end up paying almost $500 million in compensation. At that time, everyone thought Union Carbide had done extremely well. But in later years, Fali Nariman, had told people close to him how much he was tortured by this case, how bad he felt, even though he had succeeded in the case, he felt that, deeply affected, in his own conscience. So, these are the things that lawyers go through. You all think we make a lot of money, but we also have a conscience, and it also tortures us from time to time. So on that very sad
So,
note.
can I say though, Manu, I think one of the most beautiful things he said, and it resonates so much with me, is, and I'm paraphrasing here, when he said that I was born and I flourished in a secular India, and as far as possible, God willing, I would like to die in a secular India. And I think if there was something I could put as an epithet, we don't do tombstones, but if we did, I would have loved to have something like that. It was beautiful.
Very true. Over to you, Ruchir, for the last words.
I hope we valued your time and you enjoyed the episode. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can email us at indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find all of us on Twitter or X. Rishi is on Rishi_Suri. Manu is on Manuraj1983. Mitali is on Mitali Live. I am on Ruchir_P. The India Dialogue is at TID_podcast, or you can find us on YouTube at India Dialogue Podcast channel. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll hope to see you again next week. Bye.